Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar on succession planning for your big game. As you may know, I'm sure you're well aware, there's a big sports event just around the corner on Sunday that we're all excited about. So we thought it'd be a fun theme for today's topic. So let's get started. A little bit about us. I'm Casey.
I'm Hilary.
And you should know that I'm pretty much 98% made up of Diet Mountain Dew and Doritos. I love Breaking Bad. And you've heard of quarterback. Well, what about continuous employee feedback?
Pretty good. I'm Hilary Wilson. I'm Global Accounts Manager here at Rabbit. If you have watched our other webinars, I finally love my Peloton. I'm a big podcast enthusiast, and I like to consider myself the core values whisperer.
And that was a love-hate relationship with the Peloton. So I'm glad to see that it moved more towards love, and that's a good direction for it to flow. So here, you may have seen this on our website, but this is Aunt Dawn's Chocolate Eclair. Just in case you're headed somewhere this weekend to watch the big game, want to bring something along with you. This is very easy to make, easy to bring. It's a crowd pleaser. Feel free to snag a screenshot or wait for the recap email for a quick download. It always works, so you're welcome to it.
Yeah, that recipe is why I had to buy the bike.
Oh, very well. So a little bit about Rabbit. If you're new to Rabbit, we are a talent management platform fueled by continuous employee feedback. We believe that feedback can do so much. It can go from cultural and behavioral alignment, meet your goals and OKRs. You can run some really next level O&As through continuous employee feedback. If it's done right, it can really open up so many doors for your talent management.
Yeah, and when we think about continuous feedback and succession planning, we think about the alignment between core values and performance. So what we're going to talk about today is realigning your y-axis and thinking a little bit more about how you can reinvent it.
Yep. Okay, so moving right into it, what does today's succession planning process often look like? You know, this is your classic 9-box. We're all familiar with it, right?
Yeah, the 9-box is like the known standard, but what happens is the y-axis, or excuse me, the x-axis is easy to understand. The y-axis is that gray area. What is potential? This is why so many times we move high performers into leadership roles that may not necessarily be good leaders or be ready to be leaders. And on the flip side, you may have someone else who's an influencer in your organization, very well networked, a wealth of information, someone who's living your values, and might be ready for leadership, but they're not the highest performer, and they get overlooked because they're not the loudest voice in the room.
As the loudest voice in the room, most often, I can relate to that. So let's find out how we can address that. What we're going to do today is use this particular 9-box as an example. So throughout the rest of the deck, we're going to talk about how the 9-box looks now just by itself, but also how these folks might be shifted around in your succession planning if you had continuous employee feedback running in the background, or if you do already and just want to see how to complement the two together to truly inform your succession planning. So throughout the deck, we're going to be talking about Allison. She's a high performer, moderate potential. One of the best things about continuous feedback data, it's right there in the name, is it's continuous. You have real-time data on the performance of individuals over time. So you can see things like, communication. If somebody is a consistent high communicator, if they're trending up or down over time, you want to think about this in terms of, maybe an L&D workshop that you had recently on communication. Did Allison attend that communication workshop in mid-January and slowly start implementing what she had learned, and now she's gaining those higher scores on communication? So these are really the kinds of the highlights that come to the forefront when you have continuous data instead of maybe that one huge annual or biannual review, or maybe 1 or 2 pulse surveys ad hoc throughout the year. It's the difference between hundreds of data points and 1 or 2. So as we start to think about integrating continuous feedback, I really want to relieve some of the pressure and talk about how it can be a slow and steady process, and that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I want to take a moment to appreciate the stress that does go into the planning portion of this. There's a lot of time, a lot of preparation that goes into deciding what individuals you want to groom up. sometimes those selections end up being shut down by a lack of evidence or sometimes even office politics. And our intention is not culture change, culture change, not culture shock. And this has to be done in a very meaningful way. And in such a way that leadership is doing it first, then cascading it down. So on the way in today, I was coincidentally listening to a Freakonomics podcast about the turnaround of the 49ers organization. We dropped it in the chat, and you can, when you go through it, it took years of introspection for them to be able to understand what needed to be changed and how to do it. So we're talking about slow and continuous. We're shifting the way people think about growth and who they want to work with, who they want to collaborate with. And there's always going to be biases to overcome and the old way of doing things that may not serve your strategies. So by slowly moving towards something like continuous feedback, you can over time change the way that people think about themselves and others.
Correct. So introducing objectivity. Some key benefits to adding continuous feedback data into your succession plan. You can temper those really passionate conversations, just like you were saying, that can take place when you're trying to strategically place talent in where it makes sense for your company, where it makes sense for that individual, their managers. There's a lot of external factors in play. When you have data next to you, you can leverage it and really kind of either validate the gut feelings that you did have, or say, okay, my gut feeling was leaning this way, but the data is leaning this way. So that can really help. The second thing is leveraging apples to apples data. We know that many companies are moving toward continuous feedback, and there's different ways of doing it. Some companies are having monthly one-on-ones where it's just a conversation between the individual and the manager. Maybe some things are written down, maybe some aren't. What you want to think about is, are all your managers across your company asking the same questions to their employees? And are you able to, are they recording the answers so that you can compare and contrast how the answers change among people? Ideally, you have a continuous feedback platform, and we're going to be showing you screenshots from our platform. Of course, it's what we know and love. But ideally, you have something where you're measuring everybody in your organization against the same core values, and they are being scored on the behaviors that make up those values.
Yeah, you're here today because you took the time to learn about how to capture more objective data. And you may feel some of your objectives are falling flat because you don't have that baseline, and how to understand your people.
That's right. So when everyone's measured against that same stick, you can compare clean data. Your OKRs are aligned to behaviors and habits, not just numbers and production. You know your company's overall scores, you know your department scores, and you know the individual scores. And you can trend each one out over time. So that's where you can really start playing with the numbers and your data and start making some informed decisions.
Yeah, and when we talk about measuring your baseline, we're not talking about these heavy annual benchmarks. We're talking about being able to pull up a dashboard every single day and understand where the entire organization falls in, and then also where your people are compared to that.
So let's jump in. This is what knowing what your baselines can look like. Modern enterprise companies are doing this. Talent leaders at these places are pulling up a dashboard that looks very similar to this. They can see how their overall company is scoring against their own values. Examples of these values might be communication, helping to embrace change. I mean, I think about these huge companies undergoing mergers and acquisitions. How do you have leaders at your company who are helping others, get over that hump of the merger and learning the new culture of the incoming company? And who are those leaders who are really standing out? So there's all kinds of ways that you can measure, but ideally you have something like this that is very visual, pulls the most important data to the forefront.
And a lot of the larger organizations that we work with have HR analysts that are compiling this data, and you can easily put into a Tableau or a Power BI.
That's right. So when you have that overall idea of your baselines, you can move more into the cohort focuses.
Yeah, and that's actually something I've been hearing a lot of recently, is you may have a very wide talent pool, but you don't have a way to move them up at this moment. And that is part of succession planning too. You can move them laterally, you can move them into different departments, but you may not merit a pay increase or a promotion or title change. So what do you do with them? And you can invite them into a cohort to share knowledge and skills with one another and move them up together. Create relationships between your high potentials, and that way you have a really solid foundation for people to pull from. You can look at them individually and together as a cohort, and they can grow and be ready for when the time is right. So
they don't feel like they're all dressed up with nowhere to go.
Exactly, right. In our recent book club meeting, one of our participants said that he does something called a lunch with Ted. So he calls together some of the people that showed interest in growth. They do a bag lunch, watch a TED Talk together, and then share that information afterwards. They have a wide discussion. And what he found actually happened is some of the older folks caught wind of this and became interested. And some of these unexpected mentee-mentor relationships started. And then even better, knowledge sharing. So some of the folks that are going to be retiring soon were cascading down their own knowledge unknowingly to some of the younger people. So this is a really good opportunity for you during your succession planning process to think about your talent strategy. And because with that kind of cohort program, you'll have that stack bench ready to go.
When the time is right.
Yeah.
So now we have, that overall company scores, just like we talked about earlier. We're able to pull in these individuals and their performance into a sandbox. Let's look again at Allison and compare her against Jennifer, who is also from the same cohort and has been pushed forward as a potential good match for the succession spot. This is what apples to apples can look like. When you have Allison and Jennifer together, and you're measuring them against the same values in the same way, you can have a dashboard just like this where you're comparing the same values. You can see them in a very visual way and really compare them in an apples to apples way that maybe you're not able to with a 9-box or with subjective conversations in a room where emotions are flying. So there's your potential measurement right there in plain view.
Yeah.
And going back to the idea of slow, gradual change, we're not talking about replacing a 9-box. We're talking about complementing the 9-box with data. So adding a little bit of structure to your conversations by, having that 9-box still, but also comparing and contrasting it against the data. Does your 9-box align to what your data is saying, or is it maybe showing you a different way to go? So, some aspects that might come up in conversations are, were Jennifer's projects easier than Allison's? Was there less on the line? Was Allison, more pressured during X portion of the year because of things that you knew came up? So obviously you're going to add some of that subjectivity and some of your knowledge into the background and the context of their performance to the whole picture. So having all three there together, you're only going to make a stronger case. And so again, just to finish up, it's a gradual shift. It's not an easy thing to do, to change things that maybe have been in place for decades and decades, depending on how old your organization is. But you can remember the goal is gradual. It's to spark the shift, to start turning the tides.
Yeah, and it's an easy way too to paint a clear picture for the incoming generations of what their path is going to be. There's not going to be a lot of mystery around the process. They can define their own paths as well. And that takes a lot off of a leader's plate.
That's right. So what's next here for you? You may be in one of three buckets. Maybe you're in the learning bucket, and there are tons of ways to learn. We're all about it. So we have here an article to a wonderful piece on organizational agility that we've been reading. And so, feel free to check that out. There's a great term from it called relentless course correction. And that we've been exclaiming it all week. So that's really great.
On my arm.
It's so great. It's what we're all about, relentless course correction. It just sounds so fierce. And then you can attend our webinar. We're having one on core values design in just a few days. We're really excited about that one. One of our co-founders is actually going to be co-hosting it with me. Hilary's headed out to New York for a workshop. So Alexander is going to be joining me for the core values design. And he's a PhD. He's our chief scientific officer. He is an IO. I mean, I'm sure he's going to blow that one out of the water. And then if you'd like to get on our newsletter, email us at hello@rabbit.co. We're happy to drop you on that. It's a very low friction, lightweight way to keep the knowledge train going. And then apply to participate in the Spring 2020 cohort of our book club. It's a small group, but the conversations are big. From there, if you're actively comparing continuous feedback platforms, feel free to attend a live demo. We're holding one on Thursday, the 20th of February. So we'd love to see you there. Registration will be opening soon. Please also feel free to head to our website, check out our features. And then we also on our website have a product overview one-sheeter. It's a PDF, you can download it right away. So that's an easy thing to take along in your back pocket. And then if you're ready to do and maybe you want to have a one-on-one private conversation to see a little bit more about Rabbit and what it can do, what you can do with continuous feedback, shoot us a little email. We'd love to meet you.